So thank you once again to all of our participants joining us for our conference today. This is our last session for the day. So we thank you for sticking around for all of our panels today. After this panel, will have closing remarks from our Deputy Director, Allison. So this session is called Religious Bias and Discrimination. This session is designed to educate the community about the dangers of violent extremist groups and how they target and impact minority religious groups, such as the Muslim community, the Jewish community. During this panel discussion, you will hear from faith leaders about the rise of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and the best practices on how to build a more resilient, safer, and inclusive community. For our presenters today, we have Rabbi Shalom from Chabad House at San Diego State University. We also have Bishop Cornelius Bowser from Charity Apostolic Church here in San Diego, California. And then we have Imam Zia Maktoum, the Executive Director of Make Space, which is located in Washington, D.C. And lastly, we have Rabbi Scott Mitzler, who's a faculty member, and OHR Shalom Synagogue in San Diego. If you would like to read the full biography of our panelists for this session, once again, please refer to the program that we've sent to all of our participants. It is also available on our website. So let me start off with comments from Rabbi Scott Meltzer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mohammed. It's an honor and a treat to be here. Honored to be part of this panel and the whole day. It's been a very impressive day. Kudos to all those who put it together and everybody who spoke. This panel is an interesting place to end the day, looking at, as opposed to global, how it is experienced, lived, and perceived by the people in the pews, if I can borrow an idiom that's not always used about synagogues. And the reality is that over the course of the 25 years that I've been doing this work, the climate is different today. And the climate is different today, and there are things that would make us smile. That is, things related to the solidarity of people of faith and all good people to come together, demanding justice for all people. A long list of things that have been used to separate and used for hatred. So there's much for which we should be thankful and to which we should be committed. But at the same time, our society has not only grown more polarized, it's grown much more violent. We see that in all sorts of places. We see that in the proliferation of guns. We're watching from afar in terms of what's happening in France right now and how different those issues would be in a heavily armed America than they are in France. And we need to acknowledge that. We're living at a time of incredible, incredible hatred, at the same time of incredible, incredible bridge building and community building. Kelsey and the very important work that she does and the ADL does. We are living in record times of anti-Semitism in the United States. There were over 2,000 incidents recorded last year in 2019, the most ever since the ADL started recording, keeping track of anti-Semitic events. In fact, 17, 18, and 19 are three of the top five, the bottom five worst years for recorded anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. Tragically, every year seems to have its marquee moment. So in 2017 with Charlottesville, and I will never, so long as I live, I will never lose the image of individuals dressed in battle fatigues, holding automatic weapons, standing in front of a synagogue on a Saturday on the streets of the United States. I've seen those pictures in black and white from Nazi Germany through the 30s. But now they've been, now they're real for us. And if that was 2017, 2018, we just passed the 2-year anniversary of the murder at Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. in last 19, the shooting and murder here in San Diego with the Chabad of Poway. And so reacting to violent extremism, this isn't about microaggressions. It isn't about inequalities. We're talking now about violent America as it relates to extremism and intolerance, and it's changed the life of the synagogue. Issues of security that have always been relevant now are only more so. Issues of wanting to be part of a society, and at the same time being afraid that there are elements of the society, heavily armed elements of the society, who will respond violently to that, is part of day-to-day Jewish life. My children go to school, and it's part of their life at school, and it's part of our day-to-day life at the synagogue, even in the context of quarantine, where the building itself is no longer a central point of large gatherings. Living in that space is very important. So again, thank you for including me. I look forward to hearing everybody speak, and I look forward to the questions that come up afterwards.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Miltzler. And now I want to go to Bishop Cornelius Bowser for his opening remarks.
Yes, thank you, and it's good to be here. Really appreciate this. Again, Bishop Cornelius Bowser, pastor of Charity Apostolic Church, also program director of Shafat Outreach, a violence intervention prevention program, dealing with gangs in our communities. To start with, I guess when I was asked to come on this panel, the thing that went through my mind is the terrorism, the extreme terrorism, especially when you're talking about domestic terrorism. White supremacy is something that Black folks have been dealing with since we've been brought over to this country, but it really just was taken to another level of that domestic terrorism once the emancipation, and then 1965, when Blacks were set free in America, starting with the Klan, KKK. Of course, they hate every group of people that you think of that's not like them, but Blacks for sure that was terrorized. And you can look at the from 1882, based on Tuskegee Institute, based on them from 1882 to 1968, there were 3,446 African Americans and 1,296 whites that were lynched. And overall, there was 4,743 people lynched altogether. And so that's a lot of people. And that's just looking at it from the perspective of what they officially call being lynched and terrorized. And it's always been a part of this hate group, whether it's KKK or any militia or white supremacy group, is the first to demonize, right? And when you look at the data and the stats, it clearly demonstrates that Black people in America are the most hated group and the most persecuted group when it comes to race. Of course, when it comes to religion, it's more so Jews and Muslims. But when it comes to race, it's Black people that are hated the most and persecuted the most, and violent crimes are committed against the most when you look at it and narrow it down to race. And so we've been having this problem for years and years, and I know that I noticed it right after the election with Trump being elected, that I started sensing and seeing that hate rise. I live in East County, so I started seeing that hate rise. And one of the things I just want to say, and I know we're going to get into this as we move along, is that when it comes to religion, I would say myself being a Christian, and we're not as persecuted from our religious perspective, but persecuted from our race perspective. That's what happened with Dylan Roof. He went to that church because it was Black people in that church, not because he was more so anti-God or atheist or whatever he believed. It was more so because he wanted to kill Black people and start a race riot. And so when we look at even going back to the 90s, all the churches being burnt and Black churches being burned, even in the 60s when the 4 young Black girls were killed through a bombing, Blacks have been persecuted in this country under white supremacy, what we do call domestic terrorism. And it amazes me that we can call everything else extremism, but we can't look at our own people in this country, Americans in this country, and call them what they are, domestic terrorism, when you look at white supremacy. So I'm looking forward to this conversation because I do want to get into it about police terrorism also, and a lot of what we're facing and deal with and how those systems are set up in our country specifically to harm Black people, because under the hate and the extreme terrorism, Black people have been demonized. And so, and it places us under extreme pressure. We're always considered dangerous, hostile criminals, and therefore a lot of people think it's justified when Blacks are killed, whether by the police or by some white supremacists. And I'll hold it right there until later. Look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. And now I want to transition to Imam Zia for his remarks.
Thank you, Muhammad, and thank you, Rabbi and Bishop. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here with you all. It's indeed very strange times that we live in, and the issue of violent extremism is something that we as American Muslims have had to deal with, not just as victims, but also as our own community suffering from individuals within our own communities falling for the narrative of the radical extremism around the world. And it's interesting to note that long before 9/11 happened, Muslim communities around the world were themselves victims of terrorism and extremism for decades in different parts of the world. And so when that came to America and the tragic events of 9/11 happened, that wasn't something that many people were aware of, and an automatic association was made by many people between Islam and terrorism, just because there were a few deranged individuals and groups that claimed to represent the name of Islam and to represent the Muslims of the world, and they acted brutally in the name of Islam. And far from them defending Islam, they have always been victimizing Muslims around the world, and their first victims have always been Muslims, whether you're talking about ISIS or Al Qaeda or other groups, the Boko Haram and the like. It's Muslims who they target most of the time, and it's the Muslims who are harmed by them and, around the world in most instances. And American Muslims have not been an exception in that. When the backlash occurred post 9/11, our community suffered as a result. Discrimination and even public policies being enacted that targeted Muslims, that harmed so many Muslims, that resulted in a deportation of thousands of Muslims, and so much more in terms of hate crime and other ways in which our communities were harmed and marginalized. So we were in a situation where we had to try to clear our name and the name of our faith, and to tell our neighbors that these violent groups acting in our name do not represent us, and they do not represent the teachings of our religion. And we also had to deal with the backlash, and we also had to raise awareness in our communities, to be more proactive and fighting those voices trying to radicalize youth in our communities, but at the same time making an effort to build bridges with our neighbors. And so that has become paramount and important fixture of every mosque's activities, is to build bridges and to serve their communities. And so one of the things I think that we as American Muslims have done is that we have built bridges, and we have done so much to cast out the voices of extremism from our communities. But at the same time, in terms of the domestic extremism that has been on the rise, that has targeted minorities, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, racial groups across the United States. We have been part of those groups that have been targeted. And so that solidarity that's there amongst the African Americans, the Muslim communities, Jewish Americans, that is, one of the many good things that have come out of these tragedies and a lot of the manifestation of hate that we've seen over the past couple of decades.
Thank you so much, Imam. And now I want to go to Rabbi Shalom for his remarks.
Hi, and thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Mohammed Ahmed, for organizing this amazing conference. You've always been a great support to us here at San Diego State. We really appreciate it. And we need leaders like you and like everyone who's here talking about these issues, because at the end of the day, what it means to be a leader, it means to lead, to encourage people, to direct people, to give them the right kind of direction. I think a lot of the time when we talk about anti-Semitism, when we talk about racism or any kind of hatred, what really we are talking about is we're talking about a collection of individuals that are not led by the right people, that somehow are frustrated, are angry, are upset about all kind of things. Maybe it's something at home, maybe it's something in their community, maybe it's their own failure, and they don't know what to do with failure. And so they try to blame and direct their anger against a certain group. And what's an easier target than somebody that looks different than them? Why are they successful? Why are they in a better shape than me? Whether it's an African American or Muslim American or any kind of minority, Jewish or others, Indian, you could name it. It's gonna be somebody that looks different than them. And of course, we all know about the terrible impact of having an internet connection, where you could basically find any kind of thing, that any kind of conspiracy theory that you want to imagine is out there to help you basically believe into whatever nonsense you want to believe, and then direct your anger against this group, whatever group it is. So when we talk about leaders and we talk about having a conference, I mean, it's very, very important to understand that leaders play a great role. But in the teaching of my rabbi, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, taught us that it doesn't have to be a so-called leader that organizes and in a way project the right attitude, the right advice, the right leadership to others. It could be anyone, and it is the responsibility of everyone to actually be proactive, to realize that we are part of the force of good, and in order to influence anyone, you have to open your mouth, you have to say something, you have to write an email, you have to walk around, you have to state what you believe, because people want to be led by those who have strong belief. And if we have strong belief and those beliefs are good beliefs, then we must voice them, because if we don't, we do a disservice not only to us and the world and our community, but even to our religion or our race or our heritage, because in the end of the day, we're all just human. So I just want to say also personally that I grew up in France. My parents are from North Africa. They're from Tunisia and Algeria, and they moved when they were very young. And coming in, living in France for the first 20 years of my life, I have been called many, many times dirty Jew, all kind of names. And I grew up, I was attacked as well, with knife and glass bottle. And it was one of the reasons that I came here. But, now here, it's something that I personally don't want this to turn into the same experience that I've had for my children. So just to give you a quick example, last week we were walking back from synagogue right here in San Diego, and walking back, with my son, we basically car slowed down and start screaming all kind of obscenities to us. And my son, who's 10 years old, was the first time that he realized what was said, and he asked me why did they say that, and it was very, very interesting to see his reaction, because what I told him is basically those people are cowards. They're in a car. They're going to drive away, and they're just trying to get us to feel upset. They really want to hurt us. That's really what they're out there doing. And there is this kind of people out there that really, really aren't looking out for their neighbor. They're trying to damage and hurt others. And so what we're trying to discuss here, I believe, is how do we change that? How do we make this happen? Especially, obviously, it's a car that runs away, or people hiding behind the internet or anything like that. So what kind of solution? And I hope we're going to be productive, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, and my condolences. It's really sad to hear that you and your son had to experience that negative moment. Now we're going to get into the Q&A session. So please, if for our audience, once again, if you have any questions, please direct it in the chat box to me, and we will try to get some of these questions answered. So our first question goes to all of our panelists. So as you know, in the aftermath of the synagogue shooting that took place here in San Diego, and the New Zealand mosque shooting that happened in New Zealand. So the question is, why are we having a tough time protecting houses of worship? What could be done as faith leaders to protect our houses of worship?
Not sure if I'm the one to speak, but we have explored the situation as well. Since it was an attack right there in San Diego, I felt it was irresponsible to continue on and welcome people, knowing that we really are a target and we have no way to defend ourselves. So in terms of defending ourselves, which I have to say, I don't believe is a way to address anti-Semitism or racism or any kind of, things like that. I believe it's just for self-protection. We hired an armed guard, and we've also created, a system, for evacuation, etc. And we've trained our members, etc. But I feel like this is playing defense. I don't feel like this is offering any solution in terms of, because again, anyone who wants to try to destroy and hurt, will find a way to do that. So in terms of, so that's my contribution right now to at least this question.
Thank
you. Go ahead, Bishop, please.
No, I was just going to say, because we dealt with this many times from the perspective of, especially when you talk about security and, how do we protect ourselves? How do we safeguard ourselves? What is the safety net? Things like that. And I know for the most part, when these type of events happen, most of the time we reacting to the situation. I know, like, there's a lot of fear, when I was attending service and up speaking, getting nervous the moment someone come through the door, looking at all the exits, trying to, let the members know which way to exit, what you should be doing, and things like that. Because we don't believe in bearing arms or even having armed guards in our sanctuary. We don't believe in that at all. And so ours is more challenging because we're without that safety net. So what we just try to do is just be very vigilant in the sense of paying attention to our surroundings, knowing what to do if something like that happened, but hoping that it never happened by God's protection and love. He preserves and protects us from that. But if it does happen, we just have to take our safety nets, what they tell you to do in regards to when you have a terrorist shooting and things like that. So that's kind of where we come from with that. We don't really, and some churches do, some pastors do, but myself and my personal beliefs with guns and things like that, we don't do that. There may be members in our church that do bear arms or believe in that, but I don't believe that we won't have it in the church, but we use all other precautions when it comes to safeguarding. But the main thing I think is, for us, is education and knowing what to do and being observant, being watchful and things like that. Because that's all you could do under situations like that when something like that happens, rather than being reactive. But it is very scary, especially when these shootings happen, because you're always watching the door when you see people coming up looking, and we all discriminate, looking a certain way, and you don't know what they're up to. It makes you very nervous from that perspective. That is this, are we next? Especially with myself being very active in the community and the things that I do, and if not all the time, but from time to time, do get those hate emails and different things like that. So it can be challenging sometimes, where you even when it gets so crazy, where you almost like want to cancel service for a couple of weeks, but never done it. But at least those thoughts have run across my mind when you're in a reacting mode, but versus being proactive, just trying to be educated and knowing what to do in the sense of if something like that does happen, to safeguard your life and protect yourself.
Yeah, I think these are really hard issues. And I think that there's the immediate of what we do to protect ourselves. But I don't want to come to my synagogue in a fortress. It's just not the flavor. I also think the experience of not just the fortress, but the experience of armed guards and police protection plays out very differently amongst different members of my community. That there are those, it's interesting, when we have an armed guard or a police officer on site, that they feel comforted. And there are those who feel very, very threatened by the presence of a firearm or the presence of a uniformed police officer or security guard. And so as we struggle in trying to understand that and become more aware of that, it's really, really hard. I think the two other things, just to put them out there. One is, if the first is, what about my corner of the world, my synagogue, that block? Another one is about our neighborhood. Another one is about creating, being good citizens within our most immediate neighborhood, knowing our neighbors. We have churches, we have schools, we have a variety of institutions within a few blocks of us, and understanding that we're all there together. And the way that kind of, a different flavor of neighborhood watch, the way we're there for each other, I think is a piece of how we protect each other. Not just that we speak up, if you see something, say something, but without being stalkerish, God forbid, but we have a sense of what's happening across the street and what's happening on the next block, and that we're all together. And I also think that there are national issues to be talked about. I do think that the level of violence in the United States and the embracing of violence as part of our culture, it needs to be a national conversation. And I think that people of faith and institutions of faith have a role to play. I think that the message of peace that is present in all great religions, our Judaism demands of us that we should be of the disciples of Aaron, Moses' brother and the first high priest, to be amongst those who love peace and who chase after peace. That's not just something to be said up on a pulpit on a Saturday or a Sunday morning. It's something to think about within our larger society, and how we create one, how we de-escalate violence from our society, and how we create a society where peace is something that's achievable by all people. So we worry within our building and around our perimeter, we worry within our neighborhood, and we try to worry a lot nationally about how we can, hope to be a voice to bring a message of de-escalation, of peace, of justice, because American society is becoming more violent. And, and it's, I don't know how many people, maybe the bishop wants to comment that I'm not a gun person. And part of the experience of these last years, truthfully, has been, gee, maybe I should have a gun. Like, if everybody else has a gun, maybe I should have a gun. And that's exactly backwards. The question is, how do we create a safer environment? Not how do we protect ourselves by arming ourselves so that we have some flavor of the Old West that goes on. And it's very, very difficult and scary.
Thank you so much. So I understand, the challenges of not, trying to militarize our places of worship, because it actually makes, the people who are going there to worship uncomfortable. But, one of the challenges that really doesn't sit well with me is, and maybe we could start off with Imam Zia to answer this question. How do we, as faith communities, how do we move beyond thoughts and prayers after an incident? When you look at, the Dylan Roof a shooting, who was welcomed with open arms to an African American church, shot and killed people, mosque shootings, synagogue shootings in the U.S. and across the world. So, as a community, even though thoughts and prayers are important, but how do we transition and couple that with tangible actions to actually, working with our communities to curb some of these challenges?
Yeah, so I guess it all starts locally, and as was mentioned by respected panelists, the relationships that you build within faith groups, within your own community, within your block, so that you're each other's keepers and you look out for one another. So that's important. Many faith communities, perhaps in the past, didn't feel the need to get out of their own comfort zone, and perhaps were comfortable worshiping and creating community internally. But I think what has happened is there is an awareness about the importance of reaching out and building those bridges. So that's the first step in order to sort of go beyond just thoughts and prayers, is to build that resilience, to build those relationships with our faith communities. But I think it's also important to contribute to the creation of an overall climate that's conducive to more compassion, that is, that unites people and brings people, and not to get too partisan. But if you look at the Charleston shootings and the leadership we had at the time, President Obama singing "Amazing Grace" in that church, that was a beautiful moment, bringing people together and sort of calming, having that calming effect, as opposed to all the the flame throwing that has been happening more recently. So that overall national climate, that we as grassroots, at community, faith communities can contribute to, for sure, is to highlight that we are all you're all one, and we worship the same God, and we the universality and the oneness of humanity. That kind of message should come from all pulpits, and it's such an important step towards moving beyond thoughts and prayers. But then at the same time, leadership at the national level is important as well, and so that kind of brings our attention to our civic duty in terms of being involved civically and politically, and the most important of which, perhaps the easier of some of the options, is to vote and to make our voices heard. But beyond that, also to continue to be involved in our local communities, to have relationships with our local police departments, local governments. Those sorts of things are all, I think, cumulatively all important towards building that kind of a more inclusive society, because the voices of hatred and the voices of division have always been there and will continue to be there. And so we need to continue to be vigilant and to push back against hatred and that kind of vigilantism that has been happening all too frequently, unfortunately.
Well, I'll go next. Thoughts and prayers, one of the things that come to my mind, you hear that a lot, especially during mass shootings. And, one of the things is that when you look at these mass shootings and the weapons that are used, I believe what we can do in going beyond just thoughts and prayers is also changing policies, right? Changing policies nationally, where we can track, because a lot of these domestic terrorist acts most of it's not done with bombs and so on. It's done with guns, right, or these assault rifles. And we can do something about that. We can change that, right? I know that there's a great hostility when you talk about when talk about gun control. I don't like to use the term gun control, but gun violence prevention, right? We want to prevent the type of things that have been happening in the past when you talk about these mass shootings. And one of the things that can be done is that they can change policies to get rid of some of these guns that we don't need, right? And then also we need a national database, tracking database, to be able to track these guns and see where these guns are going. One of the laws that I like what they passed in California is, you know, if a person has a mental health issue, that they can, you know, confiscate his gun, let him go to court and prove that he's mentally competent to be able to still have that gun. Even in domestic violence, they're able to go in and get those guns. So there's laws and different things that we can do to do that. I think where a lot of the problem is with law enforcement enforcing this, right? Because law enforcement many times spend a lot of time in communities of color, and especially with in black and brown communities, you know, trying to get these little handguns off the streets and stuff, but they're not really doing a whole lot, being very diligent and vigilant in getting these heavy duty guns off the streets and so on, and getting some laws passed on this. I believe that that's one of the ways that we can most definitely be proactive and not just saying thoughts and prayers go out, but actually doing something about it. And of course, I agree that, you know, the community we have to come together, and we have to be more vigilant and spread more love than hate. And I think we need leadership that can really step up to the plate, not just nationally, but statewide and locally, and continue to push this love for humanity versus the hate that we have that's going on now. And so that's you know, kind of my perspective on it, is that I really believe that we should be more so get more policies passed to regulate some of these guns that are out there, and get them out of the hands of those that really don't need them, and that can possibly commit a mass shooting, especially when you talk about white supremacy, right? Because and domestic terrorism, because 89% of mass shootings are perpetrated by white men. And so we know that there's militias, the white supremacist group, and groups like that, where the focus has to be more on them. And really, you know, if for example, here dealing with gangs in San Diego County, myself, they have a database that they calls cow gangs, where they actually put these young men in this database and hold them under surveillance because they have a reasonable suspicion that they're involved in criminal activity. And the same thing should be done for these hate groups, whoever and whatever race, but most of them are white supremacy groups that are perpetrating this or perpetuating this. And so they need to start monitoring these groups. They need to, you know, get more aggressive on that, rather than spending most of their resources in communities of color where, you know, there's no mass shootings going on there. There are shootings and things like that, and we have our violence, but not on the level of mass shootings and the level of going into synagogues, going into churches, going into mosques, and shooting and killing up people, you know, simply because they come to worship and you hate them because of the character, who they are, or their religious background. So I that's, you know, my take on it, on that one.
Thank you so much. So
I'll just like to add something if possible. So, and thank you for the question. I think it's a very, very important question, because a lot of time, like many of you mentioned, you know, you hear thoughts and prayer, you know, during an attack, which I believe is also important, because it shows our members that we are not agreeing with whatever's taking place, and that's also important. But beyond that, I feel, and this is something that, you know, I'm more focused toward more concrete steps, rather than a message or things like that. Again, like I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of times with those people, what causes those people to do those terrible acts of terror is usually being angry, being alone, not feeling accepted, and upset. And a lot of times, you know, it's very, very possible, and I don't have any statistics for it, but it's very possible, it's my belief, that also they're lacking a little bit of belief in a higher power, belief in God, belief that there is somebody else that they're accountable to, that loves them and would like them to be connected to. And so a lot of times, when we talk about separating church and state, that's I understand it's a very, very important American value, but there's got to be a way for them to embrace certain values that are universal, that maybe you call this a God, maybe you call this a higher power, maybe you call this something, but at the same time realizing that when you do an act of goodness and kindness to someone else, that matters, that counts. In this society, we're taught to be selfish. Why? Because you have to make money. Why do you have to make money? Not to survive, but to buy a beautiful car, a beautiful home, to live the American dream in a way where, the American dream is only if you have a beautiful car, a nice wife, a nice house, etc. And when people don't get there for whatever reason, because maybe that's destiny, maybe it's circumstances, maybe it's where they're from, maybe it's they didn't work hard, maybe it's whatever reason it may be, they become frustrated and they want to blame someone else. And that's when attacks and all these kind of things happen. So in terms of concrete steps, I would say that are maybe effective is, again, in the teaching of Chabad, we teach about light versus darkness, that you could light a tiny candle and it'll achieve a lot more than fighting darkness with darkness. And what I mean by light, I mean by taking your members, taking your communities to regularly do volunteer opportunities to feed the homeless, to be active with a lot of time we, the rabbis, get all these requests, but our community basically write a check and say, okay, here, you take care of the issues for us. You figure it out how to address, a crisis that's happening in your neighborhood. And if you involve your members or people and friends bringing friends, maybe one of those guys could be a potential somebody who might later on 4 or 5 years down the road might find himself in a situation where he question his life and have a lot of uncertainties, but because of those moments he spent helping others, doing act of goodness and kindness, he opened his eyes and his mind up to the entire world, and being compassionate can do a lot more than a lot of time just learning that being anti-Semitic is wrong, because what is that really going to achieve? I could speak longer. We had an act of anti-Semitism here where the menorah was taken down and we found the culprit. And when they ran away, they were on cameras saying, "Oh, the Jews," and they were like screaming. And we found them actually because somebody took a video and it was the license plate. And when I got those kids in, I got a lot of pressure from my own community and from many others in the other communities to denounce them and to have them expelled from the school. It wasn't San Diego State, it was USD, and to have them be banished and lose their, basically ruin their life. And what I chose to do instead, because I saw that they were just misguided and just, maybe not truly evil, I would say, is to give them, to have them attend many volunteering classes, to write a public apology, and to learn about the roots of Judaism a little bit. And I felt that was more productive. So a lot of time, we want to attack back and we want to hit back. And a lot of times, maybe what's more productive is to actually try to change the person and lead by example.
Thank you so much. And my next question is to all of the panelists, and maybe we could start off with Rabbi Mitzler. How does left-wing extremist or ideology play a role in creating, this toxic climate that we're facing? Organizations maybe such as Antifa or like-minded organizations, are there also an issue? And then you also have, leaders in the so-called, left spectrum who have been anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, anti-Blackness. So should they be held accountable? Are they also part of, the issue that we're facing? Is not only right-wing extremism. Nowadays, not everyone is talking about the other side who are adding fuel and provoking.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the things that all good people need to be aware of, and to which we all need to commit, is to be frank and compassionate as it relates to hatred against anybody. And I think that there needs to be a solidarity of goodwill. And I think that there are very few people who are kind of single group haters. Bishop Bowser talked about the Klan, and the history of racism in the Klan and those that came from the Klan is horrific evil in this world. But the Klan hated a lot of other people too. And so, part of what bonds good people together is that, a good chunk of good people are hated by the rest. So I will, and I am committed to speaking out against racism, against Islamophobia, against any form of anti-LGBTQ and so forth, from wherever it comes. Having said that, I would offer two specific replies to your question, Mohammed. One, I am unaware of any violent attack from a group in the United States that identifies itself as far left, with the exception of there's periodically we get environmental terrorism. We get those on the far left of the green movement who blow up development. And that's violent. It's not aimed at people, but that is violent. Outside of kind of the environmental terrorist movement, which tends to be against, 90% built condos and not hurting people, I am unaware of any left-wing violent group that has attacked people within our country. Not maybe my ignorance, but I'm unaware. The challenges from the left in general are nonviolent, and the issue of anti-Semitism in the left is a very challenging one, and it comes up in a variety of places. It comes up, and I see it, that there are things that are done or said or perpetrated against the Jewish community in the context of trying to criticize or attack the state of Israel that are unacceptable and would clearly be unacceptable if people were to do that to the Islamic community, if people were to protest mosques because of, anti-women, anti-LGBTQ, because of the horrific violence in Syria, in Yemen, and a whole variety of places, and that somehow a mosque here in San Diego is the embodiment of a authoritarian, violent, fascistic regime in a country that is predominantly Muslim, that would be Islamophobic. And yet, Jewish communal institutions are a target for people who are unhappy, right? Who are unhappy with the politics of the state of Israel. And I don't want to draw a comparison between the violence and the genocide in Syria and the violence in Yemen and a variety of other places and the discrimination in a whole variety of places, because that's not the nature of democracy in Israel. But there's a legitimate critique to be made. But when people come to my synagogue or come to any Jewish organization and to protest Israel, it would be like me coming to the mosque to protest some policy of Saudi Arabia or Syria or Iran, right? And that's just wrong. And it would be Islamophobic if I went to a mosque, and it is anti-Semitic when people bring that critique to Jewish institutions in the United States. So I see a lot of anti-Semitism that's couched as anti-Israel sentiment. And again, not to squelch free speech, but it's not free speech when it becomes, it's still protected speech, but it becomes anti-Semitic when it's not about policies. And so that I find in other places. The other place that I see, and I'll call it out by name, because they're listed as a hate group by both the Southern Poverty Law Center and the ADL, is around the Nation of Islam. That somehow in parts of the larger community, the Nation of Islam has a cachet of being an acceptable group that no white supremacist group should ever have. And the anti-Semitism, the homophobia, the anti-woman rhetoric that comes out of a number of national leaders of the Nation of Islam needs to be called out. And it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable in good conversation.
If no one else go next, I'll go next. One thing that crossed my mind as we speaking and listening to Rabbi, the uprise we just had in San Diego, right? I use that as an example. What happened in La Mesa, use that as an example. And we know that we have outsiders that come in, try to incite things on the right, but there were a lot of things going on the left too. And that has to be called out, which I did call it out, but and because from what I've seen, there's a lot of folks on the left that were white that were doing it. And I saw Black people justifying it, saying, well, let it burn and soar. No, we don't do that. That's not what this is about. And we got to speak out against violence wherever it comes from, whether it comes from the left or the right. And I think that it's not just about groups, but individuals too, because Dylan Roof didn't belong to any group, but he was listening and following these different groups and what they were saying. I think it goes back to, I believe Iman, I think it was Iman that was speaking about, I may have mixed up who said it, but about teaching people and getting people to understand about leadership, I believe was where how our leaders lead people, lead the community, because you can lead them wrong or you can lead them right. And a lot of people are just looking for that. And sometimes they fall into the wrong group, start listening to the wrong podcast, listening to the reading the wrong blogs and things like that, and get caught up. And that hate is stirred up in their mind and so on, because like someone said, they're already angry. They want to channel that anger some kind of way, and they connect with that and they start doing that. So I think that that's important to understand, and we have to speak out against that. The other thing that I would say, and I do agree that a lot of hate on the left is not coming from violence, but it is racism, right? And it is, in a sense, hate. And that's what we experience. You can go back and look at history and look at the progressive era, which was around 1896 to 1920. That was a progressive era where they were trying to reform. They were trying to, a lot of these Northerners that were supposed to be progressives on the left, they wanted to get rid of corruption. They wanted to change help build infrastructure and help people. But what ended up happening is that, the Irish, the Italians, the Poles, many other folks that were immigrants that came from other countries that was impoverished, they were helped lifted up. But guess what happened? They pushed blacks to the side, right? And demonized them and criminalized them. And that's the way they were looked at and received no help, no resources or anything. And we have to see that as a metaphor, as a type of violence that is committed against blacks. And we see that, then I just go back that far just to bring you up to today. The same thing is happening today on the left and the right. California is supposed to be a liberal state, but it has one of the largest prison systems in the world, right? San Diego, has what they say more Democrats than Republicans, but we have a community that's truly over police. And when you talk about violence against blacks, even when you look at police, a black person is 7 times more likely to be killed by police per 1,000 people in San Diego County. That's based on the 25-year report from the district attorney's office. And so when we talk about violence, when we talk about the left and different things that are happening, most definitely on the individual level, but I would like to bring it even more home, it's structural racism. And within that structural racism, we encounter that domestic terrorism, right? You have groups that would label police as a terrorist group, right? Of how they terrorize the community. So we have to look at all that when we talk about domestic terrorism, because especially when you talk about the movements and different things that are happening now, a lot of that is dealing with what Black people have encountered for centuries in this country, especially since, folks were set free in 1965 by the Amendment 13 of all the things that Black folks and police have been behind that and using these systems to oppress, attack, and participate in lynchings and so on. And they see it as a new type of lynching that's happening today when unarmed Black men get killed today. And so we have to pay attention to that, because a Black man has the highest risk of being killed by the police, 1 in 1,000 chance, versus other men, which is 1 in 2,000 chance, and women 33 in 1,000 chance for women. I thank you for bringing that up, Mohammed, because that is important. And that's one of the issues that I've been seeing is on the left. We got to pay attention to that, the right and the left, when it comes to racism. People have to see in their mind and understand how they think and the way they are pushing narratives. Even, and I'll close with this, even with the racial profiling by proxy, right? When white people summon the police against people, right? They call them because they barbecue, and call them because they're at the Starbucks, call them because they're taking a nap, call them because they in these Airbnbs, right? Moving, so many different things, and not understanding that when you call the police, you put a Black person in danger. And so we have to look at those things and really start changing the way people perceive, at least speaking from a Black man's perspective, perceive Black men, and the history of the experience of what Black people have had dealing with these systems, especially when you talk about the police and structural and systemic racism.
Thank you so much, Bishop, for your comments. And this, we'll get to our last question, and I'll have Rabbi Shalom go first for his answer. He has to leave a little early. So the next question is, what is the state of interfaith relations? Is interfaith relations, is it working? And what can faith leaders do to increase collaboration and outreach to help curb some of these challenges that we're facing?
Thank you. And I apologize if I took Imam Zia's turn, because I know he hasn't had a chance to speak. I just have to leave a bit early just because I'm picking up my kids. I think it's a very good question. It's a very good question because, we are so focused on our own community and our own needs that a lot of time, when one is suffering, you don't see another person suffering. So meaning when one feels attacked or feel like there is, for me, anti-Semitism, which is the most important, I guess, or the most relevant, because it's something that I see and experience, on unfortunately some irregular basis, because I do wear my yarmulke out and I look Jewish in some way. So, it makes it an easy target. And because of that, we're so focused on ourselves. So is it important to work with other leaders, to have that communication? I think it is. Have I done it? I haven't really spent much time, to be honest, doing it. And not because I don't think it's important, but again, because, we're so busy and so focused on our own. Is it something I want to do going forward? Yes. And that's one of the reasons, I accepted this invitation today, is because I believe that it's important that I am here saying to all of you on the panel of here that I don't think we Jews are more important than anyone else. I don't believe that, we should continue to be isolated in a way. I don't believe that we should close a blind eye, or not reach out to each other. And from that point on, I will be making an effort, to have that communication and everything else. And the reason for that is very, very simple in my eyes, is because, it's the acknowledgement that we're all humans, that we all are the same. And we as leaders, have to make that step to reach to each other and to extend the invitation to say that we matter and that we hear each other. And especially if we have, for example, a congregant or somebody that maybe will say something like, oh, look at what those Black people are doing, or those Muslim people are doing, and sometimes they come across. So what is our answer? Well, the answer could be, a direct answer to them that what they're saying is wrong. And I've had to do this many, many times, and sit down with them and have a discussion with them. But also now, it's having a resource. Hey, why don't you talk to my friend, Bishop Cornelius or Imam Zia or somebody, have a conversation with him. Like, why not? Why don't you try to see if maybe that would help? So in a way, it's basically what I'm saying is the reason for greater relation is because we could all help each other. That if we know that if we develop that trust, that we know we could count on each other to help each other out, not only in crisis, but on a regular basis, then I think we've gained something, and we're winning. And we're winning because being united isn't being 1 + 1 isn't 2, but it's much more than that, because the help and the tremendous impact we can have when we work together, is greater than working alone.
Thank you so much, Imam Zia. What is the status of interfaith relations, you think, and how could we improve?
I believe that interfaith relationships, from my experience, are invaluable, and they have, in my community, have played a very important role in building resilience and building a sense of unity and belonging, and allowing us as Muslims to really see that universality. When we talk about universal human values, and that, you know, every religion teaches those values, that Islam included, and that it teaches those values. Um, Many times it could be, you know, it could be very rhetorical, and so to see interfaith work being done, to invite, you know, synagogues and churches to attend your events, and to do joint community service programs and feed the homeless together, that really puts that into practice. And I think it plays a big role, in my experience it's played a big role in allowing the youth to build that resilience against radical voices, against hate, and so it's a tremendous asset to have in our communities. And I think it's too often we just tend to rely on government policy and on politicians to do things, and they have their role and their realm, but there's so much that we can do, and as part of our interfaith work. And we have done a lot. I think interfaith relations, from what I see in the past 20 years, have contributed so much to every faith group, and there's so much more we can do to address some of the challenges that we have been discussing on this panel.
Thank you so much. And Rabbi Scott.
Terrible at it. I'm just going to put it out there. We have tried programmatically, and you know, I laugh about it sometimes. The not too far from my house, the Islamic Center of San Diego, the imam is a friend of mine, and he and I are friends, and we can have real conversations. But I don't know that I would recognize anybody from his mosque if I passed him on the street or at the supermarket or anywhere else. And I don't know that he would recognize anybody from my synagogue. And I think that you know, it's remarkable how much of our lives we live truthfully segregated. We live within our own micro community. And it's true of where we live. It's true often of where we work. It's true of with whom we choose to associate. And there's most of the exciting interfaith work I know, I see through my children, because thanks to the public middle school and high school, just I can almost see them out my window from where I'm sitting. And thanks to Little League and youth soccer, my children live in a world of wonderful people, and their commonality is they all live in San Diego. They don't even all live in the neighborhood because of the nature of the way San Diego Unified figures out where people go to school and so forth. And it's beautiful. It is the vision that I think all of us hold dear and sacred, as it relates not to somehow blending so none of us are identifiable or discernible, but maintaining our own identity individually and as a community, and recognizing that we are all part of this large. And I love, you know, the truth is, in my larger neighborhood, most of the people that I know are parents from school or from baseball, and you know, and they don't go to my synagogue by and large, and they're not related to me by and large. And so there's a whole lot of interfaith work that's happening there. And I'm interested institutionally in creating opportunities. I'm just not good at it and don't know how to do it. We had a book club for a while with our synagogue, St. Paul's Episcopal Cathedral in Bankers Hill, and the Islamic Center of San Diego. And we would get together on Sunday morning, did it for a month or 2 months till we finished the book. It was really neat. So would love to would love the opportunity to do something like that again within the larger community.
Thank you. And Bishop Bowser. And by the way, Rabbi, I know you have to leave. Thank you. And you already left. So Bishop, stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, yeah, you know, maybe 11, 12 years ago, you would ask me this question. I said, I don't mess with nobody, but that's apostolic and believe what I believe, right? That was my attitude. Isolated from the world, preach against everybody. I'm Judeo-Christian, so I love Israel. You know, that was, you know, what we believe and so on. But anybody else, whatever you believe, don't come near me. But being able to get more into the community, interacting with various groups, various religious groups, and various people, whether it's LGBTQ, Muslims, whoever, really come to love people. And I'm a part of a group in SDOP, San Diego Organizing Project, which is inclusive. And so we have interfaith, right? We just had a meeting the other day. We're planning around responding to this, have a mobile response team to respond to the election and so on. And we have people that are Christians, that are Jews, that are Muslims, and so on, that all band together. So we have interfaith. I was able, I think it was last year, invited to, I think it was AD. It was one of those groups that invited us to Passover that was going on out in, I forget where it was. It was close to La Jolla somewhere. And I was able to participate in a Passover, and they were sharing with us some of the things that they do and so on, trying to learn a little bit more about that. And we had folks from the Holocaust get up and speak to us and share their experience of what they went through. And so, being in faith, we can really learn from each other. And I think by sitting down and listening to each other and working together, we can learn to love each other, because, we all, I know, at least the groups that I've come up with, the religion that I come up under, probably could have been labeled as a hate group, without really realizing that, right? But being educated and coming to a better understanding of, what love is and of people, of humanity, we learn to work together. So as far as my view, I before I was against ecumenicalism, but now I'm totally, for interfaith, us working together, doing things together. We went to Iman Taha, the center down there, where he's out there in Kearney Mesa. I think it's Kearney Mesa, somewhere out there. And we was able to be on a panel and participate and share with all the Muslim brothers and sisters there, and so on. Had a press conference there, speak out against the violence that was going against Muslims. And so and same thing with the Jews. So that's how we work together. That's how we band together. We fight together. We work together. And we love each other, and that interfaith, we have to be able to learn how to do that. And it took some challenges for me at the beginning, but doing it for a while now, it's a natural fit for me. And so the interfaith, I think, in my world, is working pretty good. And I think it's needed, and we need more of it.
Thank you so much, Bishop. I want to thank all of our panelists, Rabbi Shalom, Rabbi Meltzer, Bishop Bowser, and Imam Zia. Thank you so much for being part of our conference today and being part of our panel on religious bias and discrimination. And now I want to give the floor to Allison McDowell, who's our Deputy Director, to close out our conference for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mohammed. I appreciate it. I want to thank all of our panels today and the presenters that we had help bring ACTRI, our first virtual conference. I also want to thank the ACTRI Board of Advisors for their support with our endeavors. It's our hope that you were able to leave today with some key takeaways on the emerging threats of domestic violent extremism. Today here in the United States, we are predominantly dealing with racially, ethnically motivated and anti-government and anti-authority groups, but we cannot lose sight in other motivations such as animal rights, environment, abortion-related, as well as other violent extremism threats. Remember that when we were talking about extremism, the beliefs are protected, but mobilization is not protected. The violence is not protected. We need to engage a full community approach. This is a human issue, and some of these human issues are intensified due to the current pandemic that we are dealing with. As community members, we can help counter the tactics of violent extremists. We can be alert to violent us versus them narratives. We can foster open lines of communication. We can be conscious of grievances, reach out to alienated individuals, and promote civic engagement. In addition to holding community awareness events, such as the DHS Community Awareness Briefing that we had today, we must continue to work on PCVE strategies in an effort to mitigate violent extremism in the United States. Currently, we do not have a national response framework or a whole of government approach. There is a lack of a PCVE comprehensive strategy. There are trust issues among communities, law enforcement, and the government. However, with that being said, progress is being made, and there are many individuals and organizations that are working organically to scale out their operations. Peril is working to reduce rising polarization and hate at American University. Many of their projects focus on a variety of these aspects, but one specifically looks at the risks of the COVID-19 era for parents and caregivers, as they are trying to disrupt this perfect storm for radicalization. The McCain Institute is working on actionable reforms, as well as an expert practitioner coalition to address hate and targeted violence, and the peer-to-peer protective project currently within 10 higher education institutions, with more to come next semester. Life After Hate provides mentorship for those looking to exit extremism with formers. Ms. Stedman of the U.S. Institute of Peace had referenced Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how we need to examine the context of individual and social needs. We need to recognize that violent extremists capitalize on our individual and group needs. They think, if your status quo is broken, we will fix it. Frameworks for PCVE need to go beyond rehabilitation and include the social ecology. To explore the social ecology more in depth, we heard from experts in higher education, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and religious-based institutions. Dr. Bruce referenced that there are higher levels of fear and isolation on college campuses, even during these pandemic times. Higher education institutions need to be proactive versus reactive. We do not want to wait for an incident to happen, but rather need to have pre-established structures and programs in place and encourage positive actions through campus engagement. The director of START warned that we might be misguided as professors or administrators to think that we have better insight than our students. Students can be our inspiration to push back on violent extremism, and they can help us find alternative narrative programs. Some of the challenges within higher education consist of administrators feeling as though they've been scrutinized by violent extremism and terrorism. However, this is an opportunity for us to further expand this discussion and focus more on topics of bias, hate, and violence to ensure the safety and well-being of our students, staff, faculty, and administrators. Organizations such as the ADL have already implemented a program titled No Place for Hate, which is focused on improving school climates in K through 12 through the use of anti-bias and anti-bullying resources. While education is extremely crucial to our society, faith-based services are also essential when we discuss how to build and empower community resilience. Rabbi Meltzer mentioned that we are making great progress, but still have significant hatred in our communities. As Imam Zia indicated, there is a need to raise awareness of domestic extremism that has targeted minorities and build bridges that serve and connect their communities. Rabbi Shalom emphasized the need for leaders. Anyone can be a leader, but we need positive leaders. Leaders are like you and me. They are proactive and need to have their positive voices heard within our communities. Now, before we depart our event today, I would like to circle you back to what we learned earlier today from our DHS briefing. How can you make a difference in combating violent extremism here in the United States? You can. You can develop safe online habits. You can offer consistent and open lines of communication. Be alert for noticeable changes in behavior. Educate yourself and others on local and national resources. Remember, our common goal must be to protect our families and communities. Thank you once again for joining us today. We encourage you all to visit our website for updates of our latest PCVE research and hope that you will join us for future events. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison, for your closing remarks. And that concludes our conference today. Thank you so much. Make sure to check us out at ACTRI website to get our latest research and also recordings to the conference today and all of our previous sessions in our Security Talk series. So thank you so much. Have a blessed weekend and take care. Thank you so much.